Good afternoon and welcome to the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown. I'm Richard Arenberg, a visiting professor of the practice of political science and a senior fellow here at the Watson Institute. I'm honored to serve this year as interim director of the Taubman Center, which is a part of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. I want to welcome the many Brown students, faculty, alumni, and other interested citizens joining us virtually. The Taubman Center seeks to influence American politics and policy through scholarship, public opinion polling, conferences, workshops, academic research, internships, and a robust series of speakers drawn from experts, the media, academia, think tanks, and public officials. The Taubman Center this year has been placing special emphasis on the national elections and the consequences which follow, with a roster of outstanding speakers and programs. Today, we present the 12th in our series of events. We're honored to have as our guest one of America's most respected leaders and one of our own, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee and senior fellow at the Watson Institute, Tom Perez. Prior to his election as party chairman, Tom served for 8 years in President Obama's administration, first as the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Labor, where he led the charge against police misconduct, voter suppression, anti-LGBTQ discrimination, and immigrant-bashing sheriff's departments. Then, as Secretary of Labor, fighting to protect and expand opportunities for America's working people, from better wages and overtime pay to retirement security and collective bargaining rights. But Tom's strongest roots are in local organizing. In 2002, he became the first Latino elected to the Montgomery County Council. And as board president of Casa de Maryland, Tom helped grow the organization from a small service provider in the basement of a church to one of the largest immigrant advocacy groups in the Mid-Atlantic. My conversation with Chairman Perez will last approximately until 1:35. Following that, we have invited several Brown students to offer comments. That portion will last about 10 minutes, followed by questions and answers with the audience for about 15 minutes to close our program. You may enter questions through the Q&A function, which will be viewable to me. You may begin answering questions if you have them already, beginning now and throughout the program. You may enter, I will convey as many of these questions to the chairman as we have time for. This event is being recorded for later viewing on the Taubman Center website and the Watson Institute website, and it is also being live streamed on YouTube. Now, it's my great honor to introduce the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez. We're still awaiting Tom's joining us. He should be with us in the next minute or two. Well, while we await Chairman Perez's joining us, let me set the stage a little bit by talking about the 2020 elections. And of course, one of the things that I plan to ask the chairman about is what we've seen in the 2020 election was a rather substantial victory for President-elect Biden, both in the popular vote and in the Electoral College. But at the same time, we saw for Democrats, what they considered a rather disappointing election, both in the House of Representatives, where they retained control of that body, but at the same time lost seats, making their margin in the House much narrower. And in addition, a disappointing showing in the election for the United States Senate, where Democrats had hoped to not only take control, but perhaps with as many as 52 or 53 or maybe even more seats. There was a considerable number of contested races in the Senate, and the failure there was also somewhat disappointing for Democrats. I see now that the chairman has joined us. Welcome, Chairman Perez. And
thank you, Dean. It's great to be with you. I apologize for my delay. I had another event that went over a little bit, but joining you from DNC headquarters here in DC. Great to be back with you and with all the students at Brown.
Well, it's great. It's great to see you. And I'd like to begin by noting that you've been frequently mentioned as a possible member of President-elect Biden's cabinet. So I'd be remiss if I didn't start by asking you, would you accept a position if offered in the Biden cabinet?
Well, never believe what you read. Okay, I had the great honor of serving in the Clinton administration and the Obama-Biden administration, and this job, I've frankly been singularly focused on the hard work over the last 4 years. So I've frankly given no thought to what happens next, because this has been such an all-consuming job. And with the unfinished business in Georgia, part of the reason I'm late is because I was working on some stuff relating to that. So that's honestly where my focus has been.
Oh, terrific. Obviously, you played a critical role in Joe Biden's substantial victory over President Trump. I had publicly predicted a landslide, which amused many of my students as the results came in on election night. But now that the dust is settled, a 5.5 million plus vote victory in the popular vote and 306 electoral votes in the Electoral College is really nothing to sneeze at.
I would agree. And to put it in historical perspective, when all the votes are counted, and there are still millions of votes yet to be counted, I think the margin is going to be just about where Barack Obama was in 2012. He won by about 4%. I think it was 3.9%, if my memory serves me. And that is decisive. I mean, the last challenger who won an election with this percentage of the vote, beating an incumbent, was FDR in 1932. I mean, you are obviously not just a student of history, a professor of history, and you can look at so many elections. This was far bigger than Harry Truman, bigger than John F. Kennedy. The list goes on. Obviously, the most votes ever in a presidential election, record turnout. And so by any measure, this was a decisive victory for Joe Biden. I think the reason it doesn't feel that way to some is because we count votes differently. Back in the Leave It a Beaver days, everybody basically voted on one day, and Walter Cronkite and John Chancellor, announced the winners usually by 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and it was done. Now we're making it easier for people to vote in different ways. That's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing that we have record turnout that we had this year, unlike any, I think, percentage-wise since, I think, 1900. And so I think that's part of the challenge we have here is when the votes get counted over the course of days, you don't have that immediate oomph from election night. But make no mistake about it, this was a decisive victory for Joe Biden.
Yeah, it has struck me that we perceive the counting of votes almost backwards, because many of the early votes and the mail-in votes in many states get counted last, and so we have this perception of Donald Trump going out into the lead early in the night, and then as time has gone on, Vice President Biden closing the gap and then taking the lead, when in fact those votes were probably cast in reverse order.
Well, right. And to put a slightly finer point on this, in many states like Florida, Arizona, just to take two important examples from this cycle, Ohio's another example, the early votes get counted before Election Day. And so you can release the results as soon as the polls close. In Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, what's really important for students to understand is that the reason it took so long is a deliberate decision by Republicans in those state legislatures not to allow vote counting to begin for early ballots until the morning of Election Day. And to put a finer point on it, in Pennsylvania, a number of the so-called red counties announced that they weren't even going to start counting their early ballots until Wednesday, the day after. And the purpose of this was they understood that Donald Trump was going to get more votes on Election Day, and they wanted to create this narrative. I mean, I think that's unconscionable. That is undemocratic. You shouldn't be afraid of what the count is. And you correctly pointed out that these votes were submitted in some cases 3 weeks before the election. And in North Carolina, I think they started voting shortly after Labor Day. And so this is what happened in the three industrial Midwestern states. Didn't need to be that way. And I hope people will change that, because there is no reason for that. There's no good reason for that. There's only nefarious reasons for that.
One of the puzzling aspects of this election is that although, as we've said, President-elect Biden won a substantial victory, the results at the congressional level were disappointing for Democrats. In the House of Representatives, although Democrats retained the majority, Democrats lost seats in the House. And in the Senate, as you mentioned, really control is still up in the air with these two runoff elections in Georgia, which will determine which party controls the Senate. But the expectation had been really more bullish for Democrats, and the expectation that Democrats would win 51 or 52, maybe even part of my landslide prediction was 54 seats in the Senate, because there were so many that were competitive. And so I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what happened and
Sure.
why the split?
Well, I think I have to break down your question in two parts. Let's talk about the House first. If you look at history, when you have a wave election, and let's take 2010 as one example, the Republicans, took over the House. They won something like 60 seats. And in 2012, what happened? They lost a number of the seats they won. Why did that happen? Because they won a number of seats in districts that were really Democratic districts. And then 2 years later, you had a president on the ballot, and we were able to win back a number of those seats. In 2018, we had a wave election for Democrats in the House. And if you look at the seats that we lost, the vast majority were by and large districts that were rock red districts. Oklahoma was Trump plus, I think, 13. There was a district in New Mexico, a wonderful member of Congress, Xochitl Torres Small, that was Trump plus double digits. I mean, I could give you a half a dozen of those districts that are Trump plus double digits. So when you look at history, you see that after a wave in the House like that, there is often this phenomenon 2 years later. Your hardest reelection, your hardest campaign is the one you first win, and then your first election after you've won. That is the reality for House members. So that's a big part of what happened there. The Senate, I think, is a slightly different story. And I think it's important to look at what we're seeing now in terms of mega trends. It used to be until very recently that you would have a number of states that were where the president, the party of the president won in the presidential, but the senators were not dependent on who won the presidential. That's starting to change. And look at 2018. I'll give you three quick examples. Indiana, Joe Donnelly. North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp. Missouri, Clara McCaskill. They were three really solid Democratic senators. By the way, Heidi Heitkamp was a fellow at Brown, so I hope students had an opportunity to study with her last term. And they lost in 2018, and those were states that Donald Trump won decisively. You look at places like Montana, where in 2020, where there's a lot of ticket splitting historically that has gone on. But this year, basically what you saw was Donald Trump won by, I forgot what the margin was in Montana. And as a result, Steve Bullock wasn't able to win that race. You look at Iowa, same thing. Donald Trump won Iowa, and we fell short in the Senate race. Kansas, Donald Trump won Iowa. We were trying to flip a seat in a pretty red state. And so that's a phenomenon of recent years. And what it tells me as someone who is a Democrat is we've got to continue our efforts in these states to talk about the issues that matter most. We can win in those states. It's harder to win during the presidential cycle. Look at the 2022 Senate map. We've got real opportunities. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, where you have Republican incumbents on the ballot, and one of whom has already announced his retirement in Pennsylvania. So we're going to keep fighting, but your question is a good one, and I think it was important to separate the House and the Senate because I think the explanations are a little bit different.
Yeah, I would note one counterexample to that coattails effect in the Senate was Susan Collins.
Maine, absolutely. She is one example, and an example on the Democratic side is Sherrod Brown.
Yes.
Sherrod Brown won in 2018 when everybody else statewide on the Democratic side was not able to win.
Well, while we're talking about those coattail effects, Joe Biden carried Georgia. So what's your perspective now on those two Senate races?
Well, we know they're going to be razor thin. And when you look at what happened in Georgia, it's very interesting. When I got to the DNC in 2017, we did a mapping exercise very early. Where are the opportunities to win looking forward? And the two states that jumped off the page were Arizona and Georgia. We lost Arizona by, I think, 3.5 points in 2016. We lost Georgia by a little under 5. You saw the trend data. Both states are becoming very, very diverse. There's a high correlation between education and who you vote for. College educated folks tend to vote more for Democrats. Non-college educated, less so. You look at the trend data in the 8 counties that are basically metropolitan Atlanta, and you see the movement forward. And so 2020 in Georgia, there was and I credit Stacey Abrams as much as anyone. The New Georgia Project was all about getting new people, expanding the electorate. And you see young people, 18 to 21, a 20% increase in participation. There were 1 million new voters. You look at participation of Latino and Asian American voters as well, and that increased. You look at, again, suburban voters. The New York Times just did a really deep dive on what happened in Georgia. And those 8 suburban districts, those eight counties that comprise Metro Atlanta, really moved the needle in meaningful ways for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think there is you look at places like Georgia, you look at places like Arizona, these opportunities are going to continue to present itself. I mean, let me be clear, the runoffs in January are going to be razor thin. There's no doubt. Somebody's going to win it by a smidgen. And that's why we're working so hard to continue to expand the electorate. I know that voter registration continues until December 7th now. We're working to make sure people know how to vote early, all of those things. So it's fascinating to see, and it's exciting to see the tremendous increases in turnout. 69% of the voters in Georgia voted this election. That was a record.
How worried are you about President Trump's refusal to accept reality? Even if he never concedes the race, and even if at some point finally the transition is allowed to go forward, are we seeing here a template for future elections going forward?
I frankly think it's unconscionable what's taking place now. I mean, this election is not close. I mean, the election is over. Joe Biden is going to be the next president. There's no doubt about that. And not only is what Donald Trump doing unconscionable, but I think what is really, really concerning is the paucity of currently elected Republicans who are speaking out to say, this is over, Mr. President, for the sake of the country, for the sake of the pandemic, for the sake of saving lives. We've got to move on. We are the world's greatest democracy, or so we say. We are not acting like one. And I applaud Susan Collins. I commend Governor DeWine and Senator Romney. But unfortunately, I need only maybe a couple hands to count the currently elected Republicans who have said this is over. That is setting a horrific example. This race is over. And again, I think about this through the lens of the pandemic. 250,000 people have died. We need to coordinate right now instead of having to work around the White House. When Jimmy Carter lost in 1980, he called Ronald Reagan immediately and he said, I want this to be the most successful transition in American history. When we were litigating Bush v. Gore in 2000, President Clinton gave daily intelligence briefings to then Governor Bush. He would have it no other way. That was the right thing to do for our democracy. I think the appalling silence of so many Republicans who are currently elected in the face of what this president is doing is really hurting our standing in the world. I mean, you're certainly familiar with the, NDI, National Democratic Institute. We go around and monitor elections around the world. It's kind of hard to go out there and be that moral authority when you have Rudy Giuliani walking into court right now. And frankly, I hate to be so blunt, but feels like he's making a fool of himself because he's putting forth claims that have no basis in law, and he doesn't appear to know the law. It's not his finest hour, and it's not our democracy's finest hour.
I don't have to tell you, but in elections for many years, the youngest cohort has turned out to vote in far fewer numbers than older Americans. According to the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts, 52 to 55% of voting eligible young people ages 18 to 29 cast a ballot in the 2020 election. That was considerably above estimates at the same point right after the election 4 years ago, where it was only, I think, 42 to 44%. This is a giant leap forward, and much of our audience today is in that age range. And so I'm wondering if you have a message for them.
Keep doing it. Keep it up. What we saw in 2018, Dean, was a 50% increase in turnout in the midterms. And it's clear that the momentum has continued. A democracy can't be a spectator sport. I speak to all of the students as the father of, a 24-year-old, a 21-year-old, and an 18-year-old, all of whom voted. And your votes can make such a difference. Look at Georgia, again, to give you that data point, a 20% increase in turnout among 18 to 21-year-olds. That is enormous. I mean, Joe Biden is going to win Georgia by probably somewhere in the vicinity of 12,000 votes. So every single vote matters. And I'm really, really heartened. And I spent a lot of time, at Watson on the Brown campus, having discussions not only with Democrats on campus, but my colleague, Michael Steele, who is a good friend. We see the world differently in material respects, but we have so much that we share, and we share a fervent desire to make sure that everybody participates. And I hope people take heart in those numbers, because that's a big deal.
To follow up on your observation that every vote counts, what's your feeling? What's your take on the Electoral College?
Well, this is what, the seventh election. I think 7 out of the last 8 elections, the Democrat has won the popular vote. I may be off by a little bit, but I think that's right.
That's right.
And, we saw both in 2000 and again in 2016 that, we didn't have the presidency, and it had very serious consequences. I think we have to take a long look at the Electoral College. And there actually are a number. You don't have to amend the Constitution to change the Electoral College format. There is a movement, the National Popular Vote movement. And the first state that passed a law toward that is my home state of Maryland. So I know a little bit about this. And it's a movement that says that we will direct our electors to vote for the candidate that won the national popular vote, as long as states totaling 270 do the same. And I think we're up to about 200 states totaling about 210 electoral votes. I might be off by a couple there, but that movement is gathering steam because, by 2035, I think it is, 70% of the population is going to be living in 15 states. And so to put it differently, 30% of the population is going to elect 70% of the United States Senate, which is one reason why Democrats need to organize across America and talk about issues that resonate across America. But I think this conversation about the national popular vote and the Electoral College is only going to gain steam as we move forward.
But while we're talking about big reforms, I want to ask you about your take on expansion of the Supreme Court, and whether you think that sort of premature discussion about that before the election was a factor in any of the congressional races.
I'll answer your second question first. I don't think that was a factor in those races. I think the issues that were front and center. You look at all the data I've looked at. This was an election about the economy, the coronavirus, healthcare. These were the issues that were top of mind for the overwhelming majority of the American people. The president-elect has said, he would like to have a blue ribbon bipartisan group of folks take a look at these issues. I mean, let's face it. The Republicans successfully stole 2 seats. And I remember vividly, I was working in the administration in 2016. They were unequivocal. Lindsey Graham, you can quote me on this. That is a quote. You shouldn't have a nomination in a presidential election year. You can quote me on that, he said, until, of course, 2020 rolls around. And, the Supreme Court is only as good as the American people's acceptance of it. And what's happened over these 2 cycles has created a crisis of confidence in the court. I think the Chief Justice is aware of that. And so, Joe Biden wants to take a methodical and careful and bipartisan look at those issues. And I hope that happens.
I have time for about one more question, and then we're going to turn to 3 students that we've selected and allow them to make some comments. And then following that, we'll open up to questions and answers from the audience. And
I was a little bit late, so I can stay over a little bit if that would be helpful.
That's terrific. As a final question, I'd like to ask you: our politics obviously have become increasingly polarized by hyperpartisanship. This goes back. Some people point to the origin. They point at the so-called Gingrich Revolution. I tend to look back even further as 1980 and the Reagan victory there. But it's pretty clear that things have become more polarized virtually year by year by year since then. And the question I have for you is, how do we get back from this? This situation, it's corrosive to democracy, I believe. And so how do we get back to at least the willingness of the 2 parties to come to the table and negotiate in good faith?
Well, let me start at a micro level and then move out a little bit. And here's what I mean by a micro level. When I had the privilege of coming back to Brown, because it's my alma mater, back in 2017 to the Watson Institute, one of the first people, and I'm very grateful for Dean Steinfeld and his allowing me to do this. One of the first people that I suggested also come was Michael Steele, the former head of the Republican National Committee. And here's why. When I was at Brown, I always thought, I thought that we didn't do a good enough job of learning how to interact with people whose worldviews were different. And if you're going to succeed in life, you've got to understand how to do that. I worked for Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy, while he was the liberal lion of the Senate, was incredibly successful because he built partnerships with Orrin Hatch. He built partnerships with Strom Thurmond. He built partnerships with people who saw the world completely differently. And so, part of what I've tried to do at Brown, and yeah, Chairman Steele and I have done meetings together with the Brown Dems and the Brown Republicans. I think we have to work at a campus level. We have to continue to work vigilantly to build that space so that people can have spirited debates without going after. You can disagree without being disagreeable. So I start there on a campus level. And that one of the things that has been a very overt goal of mine in my work at Watson and on the campus is to get people to do a better job of that and to have the core competencies at that issue. I think it's so important. I don't think we're setting a very good example right now. And it is getting worse. And I'll tell you this, this president didn't start it, but I don't know that there's any point, and I'd have to talk to Michael Beschloss or, some of the other, John Meacham, other presidential historians. I don't think there's any historical antecedent to what we're observing right now, at least to the extent that this president is trying to undermine public confidence. And it's pretty clear to me what he's trying to do right now. He understands that he can't win, but he wants to continue this narrative all the way to January 20th so that all of his supporters are going to look at Joe Biden as a president who didn't win the election. That's unconscionable. It's wrong. I mean, hey, we lost Wisconsin by 20,000 votes last time, and it was colossally disappointing. But we didn't raise our hands and say we got, it was fraud. We put our heads down, organized, listened, and now we won, albeit by a razor-thin margin. And so I think Joe Biden is a person for the moment. And I think the most important answer I can give to your question there is, I think Joe Biden is truly a uniter in chief. He has a demonstrated track record in doing this. He has said very, very clearly, I am going to be the president for everyone. When I hear Donald Trump saying, I'm going to withhold money to Gretchen Whitmer, or he's at a rally and they're saying, lock her up. Like, the coronavirus is what we need to lock up right now and do away with. And it needs to be a nonpartisan effort. And I'm heartened that so many red state governors now are finally telling their people to wear a mask because it is an important part of how we can tamp down the virus. But I think it starts with leadership at the top. And we all have to model that behavior moving forward. And I think of life as Venn diagrams. I know that we can search for that common ground. That common ground exists, and it's a lot more than people think. And we just can't talk past each other.
Yeah, I just want to, echo what you said there. I spent, before coming to Brown, I spent 34 years on Capitol Hill in the Senate. And for many of those years, you could really build a majority and pass legislation working from the middle out, and some of the principal figures in that sort of thing was, for example, John Chafee from here in Rhode Island, who was a Republican senator and frequently worked with Democrats to successfully legislate. Well, let me turn to our students and first introduce Morgan Orner from the class of 2021. I'm showing my age there.
Thank you so much, Professor Ehrenberg, and thank you so much for being here, Chairman Perez. My name's Morgan. I'm the Vice President of Brown Dems. I'm really excited to ask you a question today and talk a little bit.
Good to see you again.
Great to see you too. I wanted to actually talk about something that you haven't touched on, which is state legislature races. Unfortunately, we know that the Democrats did not perform in the state legislatures this year that we were hoping to. And while we're not in as bad of a position as we were in 2010, we are still facing Republican gerrymandering in maps. I'm wondering how you are planning on empowering people to vote for Democrats at the state legislature level and really turn that around using the youth vote and these other sectors of vote that have propelled us to victory at the top of the ballot.
Sure. No, it's a great question. And when you look at, I find myself reflecting on where we were in 2017 and where we are now. And while I agree with you wholeheartedly that we didn't make the progress in the 2020 cycle that we would like to have seen, we've won roughly 400 seats. We flipped 400 seats in state legislatures over the last 4 years. We flipped 8 legislative chambers from red to blue. We broke Republican supermajorities in, I think it was 4 different chambers. If you go talk to Governor Roy Cooper in North Carolina, governance for him in 2017 and 2018 was far more difficult than governance in 2019 and 2020, because in 2018, we broke the supermajority. When I got to the DNC, there were 66 Republicans in the Virginia House of Delegates and 34 Democrats. Now there are 55 Democrats and 45 Republicans. We've also flipped the state Senate there as well. And as a result of that, Governor Northam signed sweeping voting rights laws that enable people to vote without the barriers that Republicans had implemented. So your question is, it's impossible to overstate the importance of your question. And that's why when I got to the DNC, we really changed our mission. Our mission is to elect Democrats up and down the ballot from the school board to the Oval Office. And some cycles we do better than others. You know, again, I agree with your assessment. You know, we didn't do as well in the state legislative races this year as we have done in the past 3 years. And so what we're doing now is analyzing the data. What we see preliminarily, and I underscore preliminarily because we're still getting a ton of data back. You know, turnout was off the charts for everyone. And I mean, you know, 150 million people or whatever it is voted in presidential races. And I think in a lot of these down ballot races, our turnout modeling, we expected X and it was X plus Y. X was a big number, but X plus Y ended up voting. And so what we have to do now is understand where we need to go from here. And the good news is that in many of these places, we have made progress. And so, I mean, in Arizona, you know, we need to flip 2 seats in the House in 2022 and 3 seats in the Senate. And Mark Kelly will be on the ballot again. There won't be a president. There won't be a president on the ballot in 22. But I think it's so important, and it's so important for us to understand this moving forward. There's a lot more states now that have nonpartisan redistricting as well. And so that's going to help at the margins. But make no mistake about it, there's still states where it's going to be challenging. But one thing we have done that is going to help us is that we've had a real focus on state Supreme Courts. So we have the majority of the state Supreme Court in North Carolina. There's still a race outstanding there. And by the way, you know, to get back to your points, Dean, in a 5 million vote race, the state Supreme Court is currently separated by something like 360 votes, and they're in the middle of a recount. And Democrats control the majority, and even if we lose that, we'll still control the majority. That's a big deal because a lot of redistricting is being done through state courts. In Pennsylvania, in 2018, we gained control of the state Supreme Court, or 2017. And as a result of that, we have fair maps in Pennsylvania. We went from 5 out of 18 members of Congress to being Democrats to 9 out of 18 Democrats in the Congress. You know, Pennsylvania is a swing state. You know, if you're going to have 18 members of Congress, you would think that it's going to be about 9-9 or 10-8, but they had gerrymandered it such that it wasn't. Wisconsin is a swing state, but Republicans have controlled the legislature there for that decade, and they gerrymandered the bejesus out of the state legislative districts and the congressional districts. And that was really unconscionable. And as a result, in 2018 in Wisconsin, we won all the state races, all the statewide races, governor, attorney general, all those key races, the Senate race, Tammy Baldwin. And we won 53% of the vote in the aggregate in the state house races. And we flipped 0 seats. Why? You answered it. Gerrymandering. The Supreme Court has given a green light to partisan gerrymandering. I think they made the wrong decision there. And that's why we've been turning to a lot of state courts. We picked up a seat in Ohio, so we now have a better chance. They passed an initiative there in 18 with to make it less partisan. So we're going to continue to fight, but make no mistake about it. We're making progress, but we're not making it fast enough. And as a result, we're going to continue to have the situation where legislators pick their constituents, as opposed to how it should be, constituents picking their legislators. And this is going to continue. And frankly, we're not going to get any help on this one from the Supreme Court. They've already spoken, and if anything, they've gotten more conservative. And it wouldn't surprise me if you see an effort to encourage the Supreme Court to do away with nonpartisan redistricting. I think that would be a major mistake. We won a case in the Supreme Court out of Arizona on that precise issue in 2014, but now we have a different composition of the court.
Thank you, Morgan. And now I'd like to introduce Ellis Clark from the class of 23.
Thank you, Professor Ehrenberg, and thank you for being here, Chairman Perez. Really great to see you again. My question is just kind of looking back at the last couple of weeks and the results. Being from Detroit, I was really happy to see that it was, Black voters and voters of color in places like Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, so on, that kind of sealed the deal for President-elect Biden and a lot of the candidates down ballot. But I was also kind of curious to realize that in a lot of those states, there isn't really a big history of candidates of color being fielded for statewide offices. And so I'm curious, looking ahead to the Senate in 2022 and just kind of the Democratic Party going forward, 2022, 2024, what's kind of your take on sort of more diverse candidates being fielded for those Senate seats as we kind of fight back for a majority?
Right. Well, we had African-American candidates for Senate in South Carolina. Jamie Harrison, a good friend. We ran against each other 4 years ago for DNC chair, became fast friends, and Jamie is an associate chair of the DNC. Mike Espy in Mississippi, we invested a lot down there. We had an African-American candidate for Senate in Tennessee as well. And I think what we have to do, Ellis, and what we've been really preaching relentlessly is we have to organize everywhere, and we need to field candidates that reflect the diversity of our country. And when I say we need to organize everywhere, here's what I mean by that. Doug Jones won in 2017 because we were able to mobilize African-American voters in Alabama, and African-American women in particular, a backbone of the Democratic Party. What we need to do in order to sustain those victories, and we weren't able to sustain Doug in 2020, but what we need to do in places like Mississippi and Alabama and South Carolina is to continue investing in organizing so that we're not just showing up every 4th October in Detroit or in Birmingham or in Jackson. We're showing up every year. And another way to inspire people is to show up with candidates that reflect the community and reflect the diversity of the community. You look at the United States House when we took over the House. I mean, that class and the current class are truly remarkable. I mean, the CBC, I haven't looked at the numbers for this cycle, but last cycle, the CBC and the CHC had record numbers of members. That's a big deal. And so One way to do that is to make sure we're building the pipeline of state legislative candidates, whether it's state house, state senate, mayors, county executives, county councils, things like that. And so I'm looking at people like you, Ellis, and I had a student 2 or 3 years ago at Watson in my seminar who was from California. He settled in Rhode Island, and he just won a state house seat. He unseated an incumbent. I remember talking to him, and I'm really excited for him. He ran a spirited campaign and is now a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives. And I'm really, really proud of him. So you look at all these folks in their 20s who are running for office. I hope you and others will be inspired. And I know we are very conscious and intentional about making sure that we're encouraging diverse candidates across America to step up.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that, Ellis. And now I'd like to introduce Hannah Ponce from the class of 22.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Perez and Professor Ehrenberg for hosting and leading such an insightful panel. I feel honored to be in attendance and, be a part of these conversations. And as we discussed earlier, election night, or more accurately, election week, we witnessed disheartening results in the Democratic House and Senate races. And as a result, it seems that in the past weeks, we have witnessed some rising tensions and finger pointing among moderate and progressive Democrats alike regarding who is to blame for the Democratic losses in this election. And recently, various media outlets have reported that as the Democrats' House majority has shrunk, moderate and centrist Democratic leaders have assigned this blame to the progressive left for promoting policies, such as Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, and widespread police reforms. With this in mind, my question to you is, in coordinating campaign strategies for the midterm elections in 2022 and the next presidential contest in 2024, how do you see the Democratic Party overcoming these divisions, or how do you, perceive this division in the Democratic Party, and how can we overcome them?
Well, listen, Hannah, I've spent 4 years in this job, and I think that we've just done something that gets done once a quarter century. We unseated an incumbent president. And I would say that what happens once every 250 years, or hasn't happened since the Republic, is unseating an incumbent president in the world of unrelenting misinformation, in the world of unrelenting foreign interference from actors like Russia who want to help this president. And part of the reason we unseated this president is because we had remarkable unity among our team. Look at the primary field. We had 24 people run for president, and every single person came together around Joe Biden and came together in a remarkable, full-throated way. We didn't win as many seats as you've said and as I've said. We didn't win as many seats in the House as we wanted to. And as I also said earlier in response to one of the professor's questions, we were swimming upstream in Oklahoma. In a presidential election in Oklahoma, you have presidential turnout. And it was really hard for Kendra Horn to overcome that, plain and simple. And what we're going to do moving forward is implement our platform. Our platform is bold. Our platform is bold about everything. It's bold about fixing the pandemic, building back the economy, addressing climate change, addressing police reform, addressing the issues that matter most to people. And I think we are at our best when we focus on those issues that we all care about. And I think what we're going to do in 2021, and it'll help us in 2022, is we're going to address infrastructure. Infrastructure is a way to create good middle-class jobs. It's a spectacular way to address climate change. And it's a way to make people's lives better. We're addressing the need to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And so we're going to continue to work on that and show the American people who cares about your health care. When we focus on these issues, when we are very, very laser focused on those issues, I think we do really well. And so, when I hear talks about division, I mean, the party that has become extreme is the Republican Party. I mean, look at the appalling silence of the vast majority of the Republican caucus in the House and in the Senate about this election result. Could you imagine if Barack Obama did this, denied an election result in 2016? I mean, he told Hillary Clinton the next day, he said, I think you ought to concede. And by the way, he didn't even have to do that because Hillary Clinton understood that, while I'm disappointed, I'm an American first. I'm not a Democrat first. And so, when I hear talks about who's divided, I mean, this other side, the extreme version of, I wish we had a Republican Party. We don't have a Republican Party of Lincoln anymore. We don't have a Republican Party of John McCain anymore. And I think that is, as much as anything, a real danger, because they're playing a narrative right now that is just a bald-faced set of lies. I mean, look at the guy who just got fired, the most recent person who got fired, Director Krebs at the Department of Homeland Security. He spoke truth to power. I used to get regular classified briefings from DHS during the campaign. They did it for Republicans and Democrats. They were doing their job. He got fired for speaking the truth. That's very, very scary. That's what happens in authoritarian regimes. That should never happen here. So I would encourage you, and I would encourage all of us, to focus on the many, many things that we're going to be fighting for together. I'm confident we can do it. And I know Joe Biden's committed to it.
Thanks, Hannah. And I want to thank Hannah and Morgan and Ellis for really three outstanding questions.
Amen.
We'll turn now to some questions submitted by the audience. And if it's okay, I'll take advantage of your gracious offer. Sure. And we'll tack maybe 10 minutes on to the end of the program here.
Deal. Okay. That's not a problem. Yeah, let's go. We can go till 2:15. How's that?
That's terrific.
Okay.
Okay. The first question is from Callum. And he asks, do you have advice for a Brown senior who wants to work for the Democratic Party after graduation? How can one get opportunities at the DNC, DCCC, or affiliated party organizations? How can students reach out to you and speak in more detail about this?
Well, we have a lot of, we've had a lot of students who've come and worked at the DNC, and they've all done great work. We're hiring interns for the spring, and then we have a internship program in the summer. I would also encourage you to, and you can go to democrats.org to figure out what openings exist. Again, I can think of 3 or 4 students who ended up working at the DNC. And by the way, when I got here, we didn't pay our interns. And one of the first things I did was pay our interns, because I was a Pell Grant student and I wouldn't have worked somewhere for free because I needed to earn money. So, and now, we've facilitated other folks are following suit, because if we can pay you, then these other organizations ought to do the same thing. So go to democrats.org. I think also the Biden team, I don't know the website, but the Biden transition has a website up. So you should get on that and see what opportunities are there. Sounds like you still have some work to do at Brown, but if you're a senior, that means you're done, I think, this year by the end of April. So you're done a little bit earlier. So that timing might actually work out. So, and remember, I've said this to students all the time, when you're applying for jobs, like I used to play a lot of baseball. If I batted 1 for 20, I wouldn't be in the lineup very long. But if you bat 1 for 20 in your job search, you can be a Hall of Famer. So, cast a wide net. Don't get discouraged if you get a few letters saying thanks, but no thanks. And remember, 1 for 20 gets you in the Hall of Fame potentially.
Great. We have a question from Kathleen, who's asked, as it turns out, ironically, many voters chose the authoritarian Trump over Biden because of a fear of socialism. How can we diffuse the power of the imaginary but deadly socialist narrative before the midterms hit?
Yeah, that narrative has been a narrative in use. It may be longer, but I'll just start in the 1930s. If you look at the congressional record around the passage of the Social Security Act, Republican opponents said, if you enact Social Security, we will be socialists. Ronald Reagan in the early 1960s cut an album, literally an album, I have the album cover, for the American Medical Association, who was fighting against Medicare. He said, and I quote, "Medicare will lead to socialized medicine. Medicare will lead to socialism in America." Same thing with the Affordable Care Act. By the way, same thing with the Civil Rights Act too. This narrative, especially in South Florida, had a lot of traction. And one of the differences, the reason why it may get more traction now, say, than the 1930s, is you have social media now. You have misinformation networks. We have an entire team that does nothing but counter misinformation on social media and work with social media companies to get rid of, to take down sites that are purveyors of misinformation. And so what we need to do moving forward is to understand that there is an entire misinformation network around this issue of socialism. It has some traction in South Florida, for instance. You saw Venezuelan Americans who I think voted, at least the preliminary data, that was an issue that was persuasive, and other voters down there. And we have to counter it with the facts. And, when Joe Biden grants temporary protected status to Venezuelans after he becomes president, he will have done more with one stroke of the pen than Donald Trump did in 4 years. And I think the best way to combat it is to demonstrate to people what we are doing. In 2018, what they were saying what Donald Trump was saying in the run-up was caravans. Remember that? The caravans are coming. The caravans are coming. Literally the day after the election, they stopped talking about the caravans. They wanted to talk about caravans because they didn't want to talk about healthcare. They wanted to talk about socialism this time because they didn't want to talk about the pandemic. They didn't want to talk about healthcare. We were very successful in 2018 in making sure that those distractions did not distract voters. We must understand that they will continue to use this playbook. And we need to demonstrate to people that it is without merit. But it takes a relentless, the propaganda machine, especially when you have the White House, the propaganda machine, aided and abetted by all these other networks, is really, really, really strong. And that's a big difference, I think, between now and 1933 and 34 and now and the 1960s. So that's why we're building and have built these networks to combat it. But that work will continue, obviously.
We have a question from Noah, which you may have partially answered already, but he asks, how can President Biden balance the anger from the left over the incredibly harmful past 4 years with the immediate need for national unity?
Well, I think I know what he's going to be doing. He's going to be tackling the immediate challenges that are front of mind. We can't look at your year at Brown. When you get tested twice a week, we're going back into all virtual because we're seeing a spike. We can't fix the economy until we fix the pandemic. We are we are in a just a horrific situation. And what we can do, I think, to bring America together is to have a unified, collaborative strategy for tackling the pandemic that brings our governors together. That isn't about red and blue. It's about red, white, and blue. And you're going to see that from Joe Biden. And so when we finally see that the numbers are coming down, implementing, I'm very heartened by what we're reading about vaccines. But I'll tell you, implementing a program of administering a vaccine is a huge undertaking. You need a leader at the top that's going to have people working together. You can't have red states getting this line, blue states getting that line. That's what would have happened under this president. That's not going to happen under Joe Biden. And when people see a president who is working together, when you see a president that models behavior, when you see a president that isn't a purveyor of misinformation, I think we're going to make a lot of progress. I talked to a lot of people who are, to quote, I think Fannie Lou Hamer, they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're sick and tired of turning the channel when they see the president on. They want to be proud of their president. I'm not talking about just Democrats. I'm talking about people want to be proud of their president. And I think when we conquer these challenges, we're going to go a long way toward bringing America together.
The next question is from our colleague, Professor Anthony Levitas. As a recent Politico piece pointed out, the election showed that demographics are not destiny and that the Latinx vote is up for grabs. At the same time, it also seems clear that the Black Lives Matter protests serve to intensify backlash. Going forward, how does the Democratic Party negotiate its needs to better serve POC and the risk that doing precisely this cuts into support among white and perhaps also Latinx votes?
Well, let me, there's a lot to unpack from that question. So thank you, Professor, for your question. I think let's talk about, first of all, the Latinx vote, because I've read a lot of stories. We underperformed in South Florida, so the Latinx vote underperformed across America. That is provably false and inaccurate. We won Arizona because of the Latino and Latinx vote. 75% of Latinx voters, and it was a 75% of the largest denominator ever in Arizona. 75% were with Joe Biden. Young, middle-aged, seniors, cutting across every demographic. Again, enormous. In Florida, by the way, when you move outside of one county, that is 3% of the Latinx vote, you move up to the I-4 corridor in Orlando, 70% of Latinx voters were with Joe Biden. The Puerto Rican vote being the largest over there. So our benchmark, our goal for Latinx voters was 70%. That was basically what Barack Obama got in 2012. And when all the numbers are said and done, that's where we will be. We might be a point below that. In Wisconsin, just to give you one more example, we won the Latinx vote, smaller denominator without a doubt, but we won it by, I think it was 56 points. And it gave us a 25 or 30,000 vote cushion in Wisconsin, a state we won by roughly 20,000 votes. So to the extent that folks watching this think that there's a narrative that we underperformed, yes, we underperformed. And it gets back to the question on socialism. We underperformed in one county in South Florida. But in the aggregate, we absolutely held our own and more than held our own. And I agree with the proposition that it's not a monolithic community. I don't think there's any monolithic community. We have to make sure we are always talking to the issues that matter most to people. And that's why we were having different conversations with Puerto Rican Americans than with Cuban Americans, because the Puerto Rican experience is different than the Cuban experience. And so we were having different conversations. The African American vote, the reference to the Black Lives Matter movement. If you look at the vote in Minnesota and what happened in Minnesota, it's really, really interesting. In metropolitan Minneapolis, St. Paul, there's never been a higher turnout, and the margin of victory was so great for Joe Biden that state was game, set, and match as soon as that vote came in. Donald Trump invested a lot of money in Minnesota because he thought he could win. People were so turned off in Minnesota from what Donald Trump did in the aftermath of George Floyd. And I'm not just referring to African Americans. You can't win the state of Minnesota simply by winning the African American vote. It is not a large enough slice of the electorate in Minnesota. People, a multicultural coalition in metropolitan Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding counties there delivered a decisive victory. If we continue to have those turnout levels, Republicans are going to be hard pressed anytime soon to win in that state. And if you look across America, Donald Trump's repeated statements about, he was talking to white women in suburbs saying, I'm going to protect white women in suburbs. That fell so flat because it was, first of all, just offensive. And secondly, it failed to understand what's happening in suburbs across America. You look at Northern Virginia and the suburban DC area. You have just remarkable, robust, proud diversity. You look at how we won Pennsylvania. You look at suburban Philadelphia. And again, very, very diverse. And so I think Donald Trump really missed the mark. Did he do marginally better with some African Americans? Yes, but when you're still getting 90% of the vote, I mean, that we will always be talking, and we had a lot of programs that were targeting and talking to various constituency groups, Black men, Latinos, Latinx men, African-American women. We wanted to make sure we were listening and listening aggressively and effectively, because we don't want to take anyone for granted. And so, I'm very proud of the very eclectic coalition that Joe Biden built. And if you, the one article that really caught my eye, you ought to look at, the New York Times had a piece about Georgia. The African-American vote was key in Georgia. The Asian-American vote, the Latino vote was key in Georgia, but so was so much else. It was truly what I call a fusion coalition. And that's what Democrats are building. It was a fusion coalition in Minnesota. It was a fusion coalition in Georgia. It's a fusion coalition in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, that is bringing victory to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, on that upbeat note, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us and for all of the light that you've shed on the 2020 election. And I know it's been really a great opportunity for our students and the rest of the Brown community and the many people from the outside community that have joined us today, both on Zoom and streaming on YouTube. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be with our Brown community. Thank you so much, and have